So what I want to help you with today is I want to help you figure out which of these two cameras is the best one to help you fulfill your creative vision. When you go shopping for an action camera, chances are you're looking for a camera that's going to give you great footage, be easy to use, reliable, and help you tell your story best. And ultimately, you want that camera to be a tool that helps you create the best story you possibly can. In other words, you want an action camera that helps you fulfill your creative vision. Your creative vision is what you see your end product being. I expect you've probably been in a situation where you've had a lot of great ideas of what you want to capture with your action camera, but after you've captured your footage, you might then feel like you can't fulfill those ideas because the footage you captured is just not good enough. And that might be a stopping point for you when you're trying to create a video. And these two cameras I'm comparing today are the Insta360 X5 and the GoPro Hero 13 Black. And I've had these cameras out for many hours filming a lot of comparison footage. And what I tried to do is I tried to approach these cameras as if I was a beginner to action cameras. So I didn't use any fancy gear, anything like that. I simply use these cameras with their auto settings. And after doing all of that and doing all of the editing and seeing the finished product, my conclusion is the following. One of these cameras is going to transform how you film your adventures, while the other one might leave you wishing you had chosen differently. So I don't want this video to be all about the various specs on these cameras, but I do want to take about 30 seconds here just to briefly show you in a chart on the screen what the basic specs are between these cameras, because the specs do matter, especially some of these, with helping you get good footage and good audio. So I'm going to take a moment to scroll through those specs on the screen so you can read them, and I will be back in about 20 seconds. So now that you've seen the specs, let's get to what really matters. Which of these cameras actually solves the problems that have been bothering creators for years? So I thought long and hard about this, and I thought about 5 creative barriers that can make or break your and my content. So barrier number 1 is what I call the perspective prison. In other words, with the perspective prison, you're locked into one angle. So how many times have you captured something that you think is truly amazing, only to realize you framed it wrong or you missed the perfect angle? Traditional cameras like the one I'm talking to right here, they of course force you to choose your perspective while you're filming. There is no going back and reframing later on. You're pretty much stuck with the perspective that you capture. And I've found that unfortunately there is a cost to this sometimes. And here are 4 ways in which this has cost me as a creator, and chances are it probably has for you at some point as well. First of all, I missed viral-worthy content because I was looking the wrong way at the wrong time. Maybe I was filming something right here, but the action was actually happening here or over here, and my camera did not capture that. Even though that camera had a wide-angle lens, it still wasn't wide enough, and if it was, whatever was happening on the edge was very distorted. Number 2, I found that I needed to use multiple cameras to get that content. I couldn't just use a single camera, I had to use many of them. And that, of course, gets expensive and very time-consuming. The other cost I found using a traditional camera is my content largely looks the same as everybody else's content. If I'm trying to distinguish myself and capture footage that helps me stand out or tell my story better, sometimes having content that looks like everybody else's is not helpful. And the other challenge is sometimes it's hard with a traditional camera to optimize for different social media platforms. And what I mean by that is if I'm filming that traditional 16:9 aspect ratio, if I want to make a YouTube short with that where it's 9:16, I'm going to lose out on a lot of my content, and I'm still going to be stuck with a certain framing. I have to pull from that original framing. I don't have flexibility to do a lot of reframing later on. To demonstrate the perspective prison, I did a side-by-side bike ride with both of these cameras, and with the Hero 13, you'll see that I have one fixed perspective, and in order to capture those different scenes, I did have to do a lot of repositioning of my camera. I had to set it down on the ground sometimes, I had to have it on my chest, I had to mount it on the handlebars, on the side of the bike with a mount, just to capture those different perspectives. But with the Insta360 X5, I simply had it mounted on my bike on a shorter version of the selfie stick, and I just had it out here in front of me, filming while I rode my bike. And then what I was able to do later on is I was able to extract several different perspectives from that bike ride. I was able to get a perspective that looked like I had a drone in front of me facing toward me while I rode. I was also able to get that closer up perspective. I was able to get that wider perspective. And I was able to get some of those third-person shots, which are very cool when you're riding a bike. But let me throw you a curveball as well. So not only did the Insta360 X5 give me a bunch of different perspectives to choose from, but the Insta360 X5 also has this new mode called Instaframe. So what Instaframe let me do is it let me capture both a traditional video clip in that 16:9 or 9:16 aspect ratio, but then I also was able to capture a 360 clip at the same time. So what I was able to do with that is first of all, I had an instant output via the Instaframe. It did the exact framing I wanted in the camera, and that's a clip I could share right away. I didn't need to do any editing later on. But then at the same time, in the background, it was also capturing the full 360-degree footage. So I also had that footage later on if I want to collect additional perspectives and do something more extensive with it. With that Instaframe mode, I found I was able to get the best of both worlds. So if you want content that you can quickly share to social media, but you also want 360 content that you can do a lot of editing on and reframe later on, then the Insta360 X5 is going to free you from the perspective prison. So for barrier number one, the Insta360 X5 definitely offers you a lot more flexibility to fulfill your creative vision. But having multiple angles and perspectives doesn't matter if your footage looks amateurish in tricky lighting. And that brings us to barrier number two. Barrier number two is what I call the light limitation. And this is simply when your content dies in challenging lighting conditions. So the creative struggle here is you plan the perfect adventure, but then you encounter some lighting that isn't ideal, and you end up getting back from that adventure, and your footage looks amateurish, and it's sadly unusable. And if you have owned a GoPro or any other traditional action camera, you've likely had this happen before. I know I have. Traditional action cameras like the GoPro, they're going to get jitter and ghosting in that low lighting. And that is because of how those slower shutter speeds interact with the electronic image stabilization. And unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do about that without a gimbal. But of course, on a lot of adventures, when you're doing intense action, you're probably not going to want to have a gimbal along. A gimbal is great for some of those more cinematic, slower paced shooting situations where you're not doing a lot of action, but chances are you want a camera that can get good footage in low light without needing a gimbal. So for this next test, I put the X5 and the Hero 13 next to each other side by side, and I filmed in a couple tricky lighting scenarios. So if you look at the footage here, you can see a stark difference. The Hero 13 is clearly struggling. The footage in many cases is unusable, simply due to all of that jitter and ghosting. And there's also a lot of grain and noise in the shadows, and that looks really bad. But the X5 has what's called pure video mode. And when you film in that mode, this camera uses AI that manages all of the exposure and the shutter speed, and it helps prevent the noise and grain that would otherwise occur. So when you look at this X5 footage next to the Hero 13 footage, there is a very stark contrast. So really, this single improvement with the X5 over the Hero 13, it really opens up a lot of filming opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise have with the Hero 13. So this gives you a lot of creator benefits if you're doing anything indoors with the review, if you're at a restaurant filming footage, if you're out on an evening adventure or camping in the woods like I often do at nighttime, or if you're at a concert, something like that where the lighting is often very low. The X5 is really going to shine in that setting compared to the Hero 13. But great visuals are only half the story. If your audio is bad, viewers are going to click away within seconds, which leads me to the third barrier that could be killing your content. Barrier number three I call the audio nightmare. So you could have the most professional visuals in the world. You could have incredible footage, but if your sound is amateur, that is going to ruin it for the viewer. So a common struggle with action cameras, you can get great visuals, but it could be a windy day, or there could be some other ambient noise around you. Great place to test this. Going through a lot of weeds here as well. So there's going to be some of that weed noise. A lot of action cameras seem to have a built-in funnel that picks up on that sound and doesn't get your voice or the sound that you want it to capture. Bad audio destroys good content faster than anything else. So the cost to bad audio is someone watching your story, they're going to tune out probably within seconds. And if they make it past seconds, they're probably going to tune out after about a minute. They're going to give your audio a chance, and if it's not getting better, they're probably going to leave. And of course, you can get external microphones and other setups that you can use with your action camera to get good audio, but that can quickly get expensive, and it can also get bulky. And it's one additional thing that can become disconnected or fail. I've had that happen before. It's very frustrating. If you've had it happen before, you can definitely relate. And then in post-production, you have hours spent fixing the audio, syncing up your audio, and hoping that everything got captured exactly as you wanted it to. And this, of course, also limits where and when you can capture content. External microphones generally cannot get wet or it's going to ruin them. So if you're filming an adventure near water, or if you're in the rain or the snow, that external microphone may or may not be able to be used. So for the next head-to-head test between the Hero 13 and the X5, I did some recording where I was talking to the camera. In some scenarios, I had the cameras facing toward me, and some I had the cameras facing away. All right, so it is that time of year where there's not a lot of wind, but I want to do an audio test with these cameras to see how well it handles the wind I create as I'm mountain biking along from about 15 to 20 miles per hour. So what I have is I have the Insta360 X5 set to vocal enhancement. Now there is a wind cancellation mode on here as well, but the vocal enhancement should focus on my voice regardless of other scenarios. And then on the Hero 13, I have the audio set to vocal enhancement, and I have the wind cancellation set to auto.
All right, so we're gonna get moving again here. Maybe get a little air up here. Some of these dips.
Whoa. Rest in peace, GoPro. GoPro got slammed hard into my helmet.
So we're sure you have space to watch out for here.
Get a little bit of motion in your shot, and it's still gonna follow you, which is very cool. So as you can see, there's a pretty stark contrast with that audio. So the advantages of the X5 over the Hero 13 in this case is you can get broadcast quality vlogs. So if you like to do vlogging, the microphone on the X5, the built-in microphone, is going to get you great results. You don't need to go and buy an external microphone to get good audio. You could just get it directly from the X5. With the Hero 13, if it's not really windy out, you can get usable results, but if it is windy or there's a lot of other noise around you, you're probably going to need an external mic. But switching gears, imagine if your camera could actually get better over time, instead of becoming outdated the moment you buy it. That's our fourth barrier. And this barrier I call the innovation stagnation. And this is simply where your camera stops growing. So if you invest in a camera and then you grow, but the camera can't grow with you and your skills, that can often be frustrating. It's going to leave you looking elsewhere for a different option that allows you to shoot with the newest and latest techniques that you've learned. Now, it is true that camera manufacturers do often have firmware updates where they offer bug fixes, and they also can release new features. But firmware updates are often limited as far as which features can actually be added to an already produced camera. And the cost of this is this can leave you stuck with launch day capabilities for the duration of you owning that camera, or you may need expensive upgrades to access new features. You could quickly fall behind on the latest trends because your tools limit you. And of course, your investment in that camera loses value as technology advances, but your camera stays stuck. So to test this, I looked at the AI editing capabilities between the X5 and the Hero 13, and I also checked out any creative modes that both of these cameras have, and I also looked at their software updates over time. Here's what I found. The Hero 13 largely had a static feature set. There were minimal post-purchase improvements. There were some firmware updates that I've received since this camera was released, but most of those firmware updates related to some of the add-ons, such as the anamorphic lens, the ND filters, the macro lens, those type of things. There weren't really any actual new features added internally to the camera. And of course, there's a lot of hardware limited growth. I feel like the Hero 13 is kind of maxing out the hardware capabilities that are built into it. The software can't really be tweaked much further to wring much more out of this camera. But the X5, of course, has a triple AI chip built into it. And this chip has enabled Insta360 to push out continuous improvements, even since this camera was released not that long ago. Insta360 has also put a lot of effort into their app development. The mobile app is just packed with a ton of features. There's a lot of AI editing tools built into that. And it seems like Insta360 is releasing new templates frequently. Every time I go to that app, I feel like there's at least 1 or 2 new templates there. So I would say they're releasing new templates at least a couple times a month, which is cool. There's always something new there to play around with and to innovate with. And there's also a lot of cloud-based feature rollouts, which is also pretty cool. So for example, in the past month, the Insta360 app received 3 new Shot Lab templates that I can take my X5 footage, put them into, and I can export something different from what I was able to export a month before. But my Hero 13, when it comes to editing, it works exactly the same as the day I bought it. And that's both good and bad. If you're satisfied with that same editing process each time, the Hero 13 can do that. You don't have to have any change. You can do the same thing over and over. Of course, with the X5, you can also do the same editing process over and over. You just simply have additional options. This is where I view the X5 as having that future-proofing advantage. It's a camera that grows with your skills, and it stays current with trends, and that investment does better with holding its value. And what I mean by that is the value it holds for you as a creator. And of course, all of these barriers potentially lead to one of the biggest problems of all, and that is content that looks like everybody else's. Let's tackle the final barrier that often keeps your content invisible. Now, if you have a channel on YouTube and you're fairly new to YouTube, and maybe you have a subscriber count that's less than 1,000, or maybe you have a count that's higher than 1,000, maybe at a couple thousand, but you probably have found that the competition is steep. There are lots and lots of creators out there with channels of a similar size and a similar sized audience, and each of those channels is competing for that same audience. So you obviously want the greatest competitive edge that you can get with telling your story and attracting those viewers that you want to attract. But you may have found your content is getting lost in the crowd because it looks like everybody else's. And in a world of endless scrolling, having that unique perspective is often what gets the thumb to stop scrolling. And barrier number 5 is what I call the creativity ceiling. And my subtitle for this is content that disappears in the crowd. Your content might perform poorly because it looks familiar. It doesn't look new, revolutionary. Familiar isn't always bad. Once you have an established brand and an established way of telling your stories, familiar can actually be a good thing. But people often get bored as well, and they're looking for something different. That can really attract their attention. And another cost is you may have difficulty building a personal brand or a signature way of telling your stories. And of course, this can result in lower engagement, slower audience growth, and ultimately, if you have a traditional action camera like the Hero 13, you're probably going to need multiple cameras to get those creative shots that help you stand out. So for this head-to-head test, I put both of these cameras next to each other, and I tried to film some creative shots. Shots that were not common, shots that you don't see every day, maybe some unique angles, different things like that. And what I found with the Hero 13, the footage was a great quality. There's no denying that. The footage looks good, but it did have those predictable perspectives that everybody has seen. The GoPro as a traditional action camera has been around for many, many iterations, and your ability to film different perspectives has not really changed. Yes, one can argue that you have the anamorphic lens, you can film more of that cinematic widescreen perspective, and there is also the macro lens, so you can use that. But those are different perspectives based on that same view. They don't have that versatility that a 360 camera like the X5 offers. With the X5 for these samples, I found that I was able to get some of those what I call impossible third-person shots, and I was able to do a lot of those drone-like perspectives without a drone. And I've done a couple of videos on this before, but one of the values to those drone perspectives is you can get those perspectives in places where you're not allowed to fly a drone. So a lot of those places for me are national parks. You're not allowed to fly drones in pretty much any national park that I'm aware of without getting a permit, and those permits are typically not going to be approved. So this enables you to get a unique perspective in places where drones cannot be flown, and that can really be a nice creator edge. If you're someone who likes to film in those places and you want your content to stand out and get those unique shots that others cannot, the X5 is really going to enable you to do that. And as you experiment more with a camera like the X5, you can really figure out what your signature style is with that camera. So maybe on your channel, you want to develop some signature shots that help define you And then those signature shots can start to become familiar to your audience while also engaging new viewers. And ultimately, this can be content that stops the scroll. So if you're making a lot of shorts, if that's something you like to do, or you like to do Instagram reels, the X5 can really help your content stand out from the rest. So we've identified these 5 barriers, and in all of these cases, the X5 does do a better job at helping you solve those. So what I want to do next is I want to go through a few creative scenarios, and I want to talk about which camera serves you best in those scenarios. These are situations that you and I will often face as creators. And these are real tests. These aren't lab tests. These are real scenarios that determine whether your content succeeds or fails. So the first scenario is what I call the solo creator challenge. So the challenge for you is you're creating content by yourself, and you need multiple angles, and you of course have a limited budget. If you didn't have a limited budget, you would probably hire someone else to film for you. So for this scenario, I did a mountain biking session. So what I did is I rode my mountain bike on the same trail. I mounted both cameras on the mountain bike, and then I took the bike for a ride. So with the Hero 13, I could get some great footage, but what I did have to do is I had to stop and reposition the camera several times. I had to mount it both to my bike and to my chest to get that different perspective. And if I wanted a perspective of the wheel spinning or me pedaling, I had to turn the camera angle and I had to reposition it multiple times. But with the X5, what I did is I used the Instaframe feature, and I pressed record once, and I let the camera do the rest for me automatically. So I was able to hit record once, and I was able to ride naturally. And then within 30 seconds of finishing the ride, when I pushed stop on the X5, I had an Instaframe that I could share right away. So if I wanted to share that on my YouTube Shorts and I wanted to keep my audience looped into my adventure, I could do that right away. I didn't have to do any editing. I didn't have to do any waiting. I didn't have to choose perspectives. I shared it, and that was it. And then later on for the extended creative process, I still had all of that 360 footage. So I could build out a longer adventure story if I wanted to, and I could do some different reframing. I could extract third-person shots that made it look like I had a drone filming me. And I could also create some close-up action sequences that I can't do with the traditional action camera. And at the same time, I could also have those wide establishing shots. Part of telling a good story is having a variety of perspectives. And the X5 has all of those perspectives contained within that 360 file. All you have to do is draw those out when and where you want to during the editing process. With the GoPro, you really have to position it for those scenes that you want. You can't really draw them out because you're pretty much stuck with the shot you got as far as it being wide. You can't go any wider. You can, of course, crop in a little bit, but you are going to notice the quality is going to quickly go down if you crop in too far on that scene. So for the Hero 13, to get all of those shots I wanted, and then to edit them later on, it took me several hours from just that one bike ride. And that bike ride was a total of 30 minutes. But with the Insta360 X5, with the Instaframe mode, it only took me 30 minutes to create that finished product, because as soon as I stopped it, I had that ready to go and ready to share. And of course, with the additional 360 footage, I was able to edit that later on to make a more extensive video. But with that initial footage, I was able to have it right there, ready to go. So the next creator challenge is what I call the brand building test. And this challenge is which of these cameras is going to help you create content for the various channels where you share your content. So you may share your content on YouTube, but chances are you're also already or looking to share your content on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, etc. For this particular focus, this is where Instaframe on the X5 can really help make this a lot easier for you and really help set you up for success. So what I did with this is I took both of these cameras on a hiking session in the woods, and I had them both right here in front of me. And for the Hero 13, I was filming in my traditional 5.3K linear mode. And then with the X5, I had it filming in the Instaframe mode. So at the end of my hike, I had several different shots from the Instaframe mode that I could share right away to platforms. The camera had already reframed all of those. It had picked the best framing, and it was shareable right away. With the Hero 13, I had to find the highlights, and I had to piece them together and then make a short or a TikTok that way. So ultimately, what I could do with the X5 from that single filming session without any editing is I was able to get a YouTube short with those impossible third-person shots. I was able to have the vertical format for an Instagram reel with cinematic movement. For my YouTube main channel, I was able to have wide establishing shots and close-up action sequences. But with the Hero 13, the reality was I had one perspective that I had to then crop and adapt for the various platforms. Now, the Hero 13 does let you film in a mode that's called 8x7, and it does help with that. So you can extract horizontal and vertical from that same nearly square output, but it's not nearly the same versatility as 360-degree content, where you can literally pick any angle. So what I found is the X5 really helped me with content multiplication. I was able to get 6 different pieces of content from that one recording session. And if you think about it, which of these clips do you think is going to perform better and drive more engagement? Is it going to be your clips from the X5 or is it going to be your clips from the Hero 13? That's a great question that I encourage you to consider when you're looking at both of these cameras. And finally, let's talk about the third creator scenario. It's what I call the workflow efficiency reality. And with this, simply consider your time investment in editing. Now, if you're like me, you're probably very busy. Maybe you have children like I do. You have a family you want to spend time with, and you don't want to invest any more time into editing than you have to. You want to produce great, engaging content, but you don't want to waste time. Efficiency really matters. So first, let's start with the Hero 13 traditional process. What you do is you pre-plan. So you decide which angles you want to capture with that camera. And if needed, you set up multiple cameras with different positions, or you plan multiple takes. Step 2 is you start recording, and you either start each of those cameras recording at the same time, or you reposition your single camera and record different takes of that footage from different perspectives. Then when you're done recording, you have the file management steps. So you need to copy all of your clips to your computer, and you need to organize them before you start editing. For step 4, you do the editing, which is a traditional timeline editing. And you do your color correction and you do your audio sync. If you had to use an external mic or if you had to use multiple cameras, you need to sync those together as well. And then step 5 is you need to optimize for your platform. So if it's going to be traditional long form YouTube, if it's going to be a YouTube short, if it's going to be TikTok, you need to make sure your settings when editing are optimized for that platform. So your total time for one project like that is probably going to be about 4 to 6 hours from start to finish. Of course, depending on the length of your shoot and your video. But let's say this is for a typical 10-minute video. Compare that to the X5 process. And let's say we're using Instaframe for the X5 process. So what we're going to have is we're going to have the Instaframe and the full 360 editing process. So what you do is you take a single camera, the X5, and you press record once. And with it in Instaframe mode, you're capturing everything in both traditional and 360-degree modes. So step 2, when you're done, you can post the Instaframe footage directly to socials. You don't have to do any editing other than cutting it up into the pieces that you want to share. And then step 3, you have your 360 footage that you can do your later creative work with. So that's where you can take more of the time to reframe it and get those precise scenes that you want. And what you can do is you can reframe that same footage for any aspect ratio or platform. The Insta360 apps make it particularly easy to do this. You click one button and it optimizes your footage before you export it. And then of course, for that advanced editing, you can use the AI tools that Insta360 has made available in their app. And you can use those ShotLab templates for trending effects. So let's say you filmed for 30 minutes. The total time you invested into this is the 30 minutes for the filming, and then about 1 to 2 hours for what I call that premium content creation. So if you look at the productivity measurement for this, the Hero 13 for the same adventure would take me about 4 to 6 hours from start to finish, but the X5 will take about 1 to 3 hours from start to finish. And there's that little bit broader range there, because if you're just using the Instaframe content, it's going to take on the lower end of that. It's going to take only about an hour. But if you're doing some of that premium content in addition to that, it's going to take a little bit longer, but still about half the time as what the Hero 13 took me. So what I found with the X5 is I spend about 50% less time on the technical editing, and I find I'm able to enjoy more time outside creating as a result. I don't have to feel rushed when creating. I can really enjoy it, and it's fun to enjoy the process while filming and not just being out there solely to film. But to the ultimate question, which of these cameras is your perfect camera match or as close to perfect as possible? Now that we've seen both cameras in action and we've talked about the various challenges, which of these cameras is actually best for you? And which one is going to most power your creative vision? So I've come up with 3 different creative profiles, and I encourage you to think about these and think about which one is most closely aligned to you. So the first creator profile is the efficiency expert. The efficiency expert is one who wants immediate results with zero learning curve. So the Hero 13 does have a few advantages here. The Hero 13 can feel familiar from day one because it is that traditional camera. It's not 360-degree footage, and it can work with your existing workflows. So if you've been using traditional cameras for a long time, it's going to feel familiar, and you're just going to be able to keep doing what you've been doing. And this can fit best when you need professional deliverables or you're working in a team environment. Basically, this is reliable results using proven methods. The second profile is what I call the creative innovator. This is creators that want to push boundaries and those creators that want to create unique content. So the X5, of course, has a clear advantage here. The X5 has revolutionary capabilities. It has a lot of AI assistance. You can capture impossible shots, and it has a general future-proof evolution to it. So this fits well when you want to brand build. So if you want to use a lot of different platforms to build your brand, and if you're looking for social media growth, and if you want that creative differentiation from other creators, the X5 is definitely going to help you do that. And then profile number 3 is what I call the pragmatic creator. And this is creators that want the best results with reasonable effort. So some decision factors here is going to be the learning curve versus the creative possibilities, as well as the cost versus the capabilities. So my assessment between these two cameras is the X5 does take about 2 to 3 days to master. But then after that point, the AI makes everything easier. Really, you just have to get familiar with that camera if you've only used traditional cameras before. And once you get familiar with it, it's going to all feel second nature. Muscle memory is going to kick in. It's going to get a lot easier. So this is where, for your timeline as a pragmatic creator, you have to look at your immediate needs versus your long-term creative growth. When you consider those two factors, the X5 I consider the best for pragmatic creators as well. But let's talk about the investment reality check. So for this, I'm going to give a quick total cost analysis. For the Hero 13, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Hero 13 costs $399.99. But if you want any of the lens mods, those do cost between $100 and $200 each. And those lens mods are really needed for the Hero 13 to unlock the full potential of that camera. And then you're probably going to need external audio gear, especially if you're filming in windy conditions. And then if you need additional cameras, probably at least one more to get different angles. When you add all of that up, you're looking at approximately $800 to $1,200 total to unlock your creative vision with the Hero 13. But cost analysis for the X5, with the X5, you basically get the complete package. So your initial cost is a little bit more upfront for just the camera. It is $549.99. But you get the unlimited angles. You don't have to buy any lens mods. It's built into the camera. This camera captures 360-degree footage. And you can get all of those different perspectives from one single camera mounted in one single manner. In addition, you can get that really good sounding audio, as we talked about earlier. The audio does sound a lot better from the X5, especially on windy days. And you have that AI editing that you can use with the Insta360 apps that come at no extra cost. I encourage you to do an ROI analysis, and what I mean by that is look at these cameras and consider which one is going to give you a better return on investment as a creator. And finally, the verdict: which camera powers your creative vision best? After extensive testing, there is a clear pattern, as you've probably noticed in this video. And I have to say, both cameras do well. I own both of these cameras. I like them both. I use them both. But these cameras do serve completely different creative philosophies. And the question isn't really which is better. It's which one of these cameras aligns most with your creative philosophy. So here is the creative barrier scorecard. This is those 5 creative barriers I talked about earlier. And this chart simply is a summary of how these two cameras perform against those creative barriers. So the Hero 13 may be best if you're a reliability seeker. In other words, if proven workflows matter more than cutting edge features to you, you may want to choose the Hero 13. If you're a budget optimizer, you may also want to choose the Hero 13 if you simply want that camera and nothing else. But as we talked about, you are going to be limited and you're going to potentially face some challenges that you won't face with the X5. But the Hero 13 does cost $150 less. And if you are an action specialist, in other words, if high frame rate slow motion is critical to your style, you may want to choose the Hero 13. There is a little bit more slow motion capabilities there for the really slow motion. Alternatively, I encourage you to choose the X5 if you are the brand builder. So if you want to have unique content that helps you build your brand across various different platforms, the X5 is going to help you stand out. If you're a solo creator like me and you need one tool that replaces multiple cameras and crew, the X5 is definitely going to meet that need better. And if you're future focused and you want equipment that evolves with you, the X5 is also going to do that. And if you're a story innovator and you want to tell stories in ways that most others can't, the X5 is going to help you do that as well. So in summary, the X5 doesn't just compete with the Hero 13, it represents a fundamental shift in how we create content. And if you're ready to expand what's possible with your storytelling, the X5 unlocks that in ways that the Hero 13 simply cannot. And if you're already using one of these cameras, share a link to your videos in my comments below. I'd love to check them out. And in the end, if you end up choosing the X5, I've got a complete guide to all of the best settings I recommend. I'll link to that above. And if you end up choosing the Hero 13, I've got a complete beginner's guide to the Hero 13 also linked. And if you found value in this video, please hit that like button. It helps me a lot. And if you haven't already subscribed, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button and bell notification because I do a lot of comparison videos and I want to continue doing those to help you find the very best equipment and gear for your creative vision. And both cameras are linked in the description below because the right choice for you depends entirely on your creative vision, goals, and style.